We have a quorum, so we shall.
Okay, so, good evening, Mayor, Council. This is Josh, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Okay, if we get too low and talking, just speak up and say something, and then we'll, speak up a little louder, or make sure that you can see whatever the presentation is. So, we wanted to give you a little bit better understanding of what the integrated management plan is and how it pertains to the projects that we have getting ready to happen in wastewater, water. As you know, in January, we gave you a full-blown presentation of what we're doing with all utilities. But this presentation is just for the integrated management plan and how that pertains to the two utilities, specific utilities that we're going to be talking about tonight. So presenters are David Craney from HDR, which is the company that was selected by MPUA, and Lacey Hirschvogel is with HDR now. And then in the Zoom audience, we have Josh Youngblood, which took the place of Lacey Hirschvogel at MPUA, and then Yul Loss is in the audience too. So if you all have specific questions for MPUA folks, then you can. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and he's going to give you a presentation. What I will ask though is that this would be a very informal presentation. If you have a question, just jump in and ask a question. There is some slide deck that we're going to follow that as we work through the process, but at any point in time, please ask your questions. Okay, yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, we want this to be a discussion as much as anything. So I will, well, first of all, introduce myself. So I'm David Bryan from HDR. As Jeff said, this is Lacey Hirschvogel. You guys might recognize Lacey. She was actually with MPUA a while back when we started this project. Oh, sure. Sorry, Josh. And then like Jeff said, we've got Josh Youngblood on the phone who actually represents MPUA now. With that, I'm going to try and share the screen here. So just so you know, at HDR, I'm working out of our St. Louis office right now. I primarily focus on Clean Water Act regulatory type issues, permitting, integrated plans. I manage a lot of our integrated plan projects that we work on. They're primarily in Missouri and Kansas, and then Lacey is part of that group, our utility planning group, helped us do those projects. So let's share this guy on Zoom here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see it. If not, please let us know. It's not showing up. There's always technical.
You think after a year and a half of COVID, we'd all be better at this. But no, we're
Hit cancel there.
Try again.
You're sharing your screen that you're looking at, not the one that's on.
Is that working?
You're sharing your notes screen.
Let me see if I can. Sure, yeah, we'll do it first. Okay, we'll jump into it here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the integrated plan, give you guys a little bit of background. This is a little bit of a complicated, can be a complicated topic. Hopefully, there we go. So we got a real simple agenda. We want this to be as much discussion. So we're going to go through sort of the big picture. What is integrated planning? What are these concepts that we'll talk through? Work through this framework that really sets up how this integrated planning process works. And this is a framework that we care about that states and municipalities are supposed to follow as they go through the process. And then get a little bit more specifically into what our approach is for your project. And anywhere through here, if you got questions, please ask. For sure. So first, why we're out here, like Jeff said, back in January, you guys talked about some of the significant challenges we've got primarily on the wastewater treatment facility and collection system, and then in the drinking water system. And the wastewater treatment system, a lot of that issue is related to all of the, we call wet weather flows that are given the treatment plant, sort of overload the treatment plant. That happens a lot when there's breaks in your pipes and your collection system, so rainwater gets in and the treatment plant can't handle the water that gets there, and you have a lot of overflows. And those overflows aren't allowed by regulations. You have to take care of it by upgrading the treatment plant and addressing the collection system. On the drinking water side, there was a little bit different issues there. So I think some of your consultants identified some capacity issues at the water treatment plant specifically. There were some storage concerns that were highlighted on some of the tanks and some of the distribution system. And both of those came with a pretty hefty price tag. So I think some of the initial numbers that you guys saw were roughly about $80 million combined capital costs to address sort of those immediate issues. And those are going to have a big impact on rates, as Jeff laid out there, if you guys are going to do all these projects at once. And so that's where integrated planning comes in, is how do we get away from this situation where we got to do all this in the first 5 or 6 or 7 years and spread it out and do things a little bit more smarter, and also get some regulatory assurance from DNR that the way we're going to do it is going to be appropriate.
Okay, real quick on that slide. So who was at the session in January? I think there was only actually a couple of faces that I recognized.
And Josh is on.
Yeah, Josh is on the screen.
Right.
So for the new people, we had a work session in January, and basically we went, or Jeff had all the consultants in the room, and we walked through all of the issues that the city is going to potentially face within the next 5 years. And so we went over the drinking water system, the capacity issues, the wastewater treatment facility issues, issues with the collection system. And then there was some electric stuff that we talked about too. Well, the integrated plan is going to address only the drinking water and the wastewater distribution system and collection system issues. So nothing on the electric will be included within the integrated plan at this time. But what Jeff did, which I thought was a really great way of showing the financial burden that could occur with just the wastewater upgrades and the drinking water upgrades, was to show each council person your current bill, and then what your bill would look like if we had to invest in all of these capital improvements like right now. And I don't know if you can see those numbers.
This
And
is
this-
like 40,
this-
45 and 117.
So it would go, and then this was just the average resident. So it would go from $45, and that's drinking water and wastewater combined, right? To $115, drinking water and wastewater combined, which is just not feasible for any average customer in the state of Missouri, really. And, using those numbers, so that would be what, about $60 per utility, which would be on the higher side of any other community in the state. And so
Your size.
really just any other community in the
Yeah.
state. So right now, West Plains, where you are with your rates, is you are on the much lower side compared to any other community in the state. Your size, or larger or smaller, your utility bills they're cheap. So we are going to have to look at raising rates eventually, but we want to do so appropriately. And so this is where the integrated plan comes along, because we don't want you to be in the situation where we have to do all of these capital improvements and then you end up with a bill of $115 combined, because that's just not feasible. So we want to look out and schedule things accordingly.
No, that's great. I forgot some of you weren't at that first meeting, so that's a great addition. So, we've got these significant infrastructure issues that we know about. Right? The other complication with this whole process, when we think about putting together the long-term plan, is what are all the uncertainties that are associated with some of the regulatory issues that maybe we know are coming, or maybe that we don't know about yet. And then once they hit, that could change where some of our investments need to go. And so what this integrated planning process lets us do is sort of, instead of going through this old way of planning where, especially from the regulator's perspective, they would look at your wastewater system, your drinking water system, and your stormwater system and say, hey, there's all these regulations you have to meet for each one of those programs. You gotta do all these different infrastructure improvements, and you gotta do those all at the same time. You're not allowed to consider, investments in wastewater and how much it's gonna cost to push off the projects and other programs. This integrated planning concept lets us now go from this sort of siloed approach to, okay, let's do this smart. Okay, so let's look at all the projects that we have to do, come up with a way to sort of do the highest benefit projects first, or the projects we know are critical, that we have to address first, and then we push off some of those, either lower benefit projects or projects that, cost significantly more, that we need some more time to build up, rate capacity for. And then ultimately get to a point where we're going from this initial case where it was $45 on 17 in 5 years to something more moderate, where we can sort of stretch out these costs over time, raise rates over time, and prepare ourselves for all the infrastructure investments. Okay, so that's just big picture. That's what integrated planning is about, is getting from here to here.
One thing to know, that is Rolla. HDR has gone through the integrated planning process, in Springfield and Rolla, Columbia. Actually, probably taking a slide. Anyway,
Sorry.
but, so, you know, we do have a lot of experience in, you know, setting the rates appropriately over the long term. And that's really what we want to do ultimately with this integrated plan, is set them appropriately that's affordable for your community.
And the interesting, not to get off on a tangent, the interesting thing about Rolla, so, you know, there we weren't looking at drinking water. But on the wastewater side, they have 3 wastewater treatment plants, and 2 of those 3 need to be totally redone in the next about 10 years. And then the other one needed some significant upgrades. So they were looking at major capital outlays. And so we worked through this process that we're going to go through right now to get to sort of a rate schedule that made sense for them and let them address all those needs. And then go to DNR and show them that schedule, get some regulatory coverage for implementing it along a more moderate time. So, big picture, this is what we're trying to get to your plan. And so what allows us to do that? So back in 2008, you know, we had the economic downturn. There was a lot of cities that were facing some major capital investments. We just didn't have the money to do it. And they, you know, the U.S. Conference of Mayors took up this issue along with some other groups like NACWA, and went to EPA and said, look, we need a better way of doing things. We can't treat all of these programs individually. We need to look a little bit more holistically, spend money smarter, and then probably get better environmental improvements for it. And so they worked for several years to come up with this concept of what we call an integrated plan. And it was initially captured in this memo in 2011 that sort of laid out the process that EPA would allow people, or municipalities, to go through to develop one of these plans. Back at this time, it was sort of an optional process. It was like EPA saying, trust us, we'll let you do this, and you guys will be okay. And so there was a lot of distrust early on. The main takeaway out of this framework, aside from these elements that we're going to go through in a little bit, is that integrated planning really lets you set your own schedule. Okay, so this is really a Clean Water Act issue-focused approach. So that's Clean Water Act covers the wastewater system and your stormwater system, but you're allowed to consider costs on the drinking water side too. So this process really just lets you come up with your own schedule for all your different needs that you have. That makes sense? Since 2011, integrated planning has sort of been enhanced through a lot of different policies and legislation. You don't have to worry about all this on here. The big takeaway, and this is a big deal, is that back in 2018, this concept of integrated planning was actually incorporated into the federal Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act was amended to include this because of some of that early distrust. People weren't sure if they could really do it, if they would be okay with it. This action showed that EPA is okay with people doing integrated plans. Clean Water Act has been amended like 2 or 3 times in its history, so this is a big deal. And the amendment is not important to go through here, but it basically said that, hey, state regulatory agencies, you have to tell municipalities that they're allowed to do this process and let them go through it if they want. Municipalities, it's on you to do it. TNR and EPA are not going to help put this plan together. This is really your plan to guide your investments over the future. Like Lacey said, we've done a lot. So there's different EPA regions. That's what this pie chart represents here. Our region is Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska. Region 7. Our region actually has the highest percentage of sort of completed integrated plans thus far in the country. And a lot of that has to do with our DNR and our EPA Region 7 being really supportive of this process. Letting people go through it. And you can see we've got a high concentration in Missouri and Kansas. And so their process is going to look a lot like this process that we're going to show. Any questions there before we get into the next thing we want to talk about is sort of like the framework that EPA has laid out. There's 6 steps that you go through in sort of a very straightforward way to put this plan together. Any questions in the background or what we're doing here?
I will add, so your community is unique because you are going to be the first community in Missouri, I guess in really our region, correct me if I'm wrong, that is including drinking water as part of the integrated planning process. So it is really unique that you guys are moving forward and incorporating drinking water. One of the things that, you know, it was a Clean Water Act decision by EPA to develop this integrated planning framework. It came about because so many small and medium-sized communities were struggling to pay, you know, for these upgrades and raise rates and to an affordable amount. And so they said, okay, you know, you tell us what's affordable and on your time frame, and, you know, we can work with you to approve it. So one of the things that, you know, as we started going through this process since 2011, a lot of the consultant firms and regulatory agencies were figuring out you can't just still silo wastewater and stormwater. You have to include drinking water when you're taking a look at, you know, your utility bills, because, you know, drinking water is going to affect wastewater, and wastewater is going to affect the way, you know, you treat your drinking water. So taking a look at things holistically and all together is very important. So it's really great that your community is moving forward with this and incorporating both. Yeah.
That's really good. Do you want to do stuff?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So there are 6 elements within the integrated plan. They are supposed to be balanced, prioritized, affordable, and implementable. That was the whole point of going through this process. Element 1, so that's build the vision. Actually, all of you in front of you have the kind of the vision statement we met early on with Jeff and Tom and Emily, and we sat down and we hashed out what the vision was going to be. So for your community in particular, we decided to include wastewater, drinking water, both distribution system, collection system. Try to incorporate stormwater as much as possible. If there's going to be funding available for that, but that's something that we'll have to determine as we're going through this process. And so really, it's just a kind of thrown everything together. What do we have? What do we want to see? And we created that vision.
And I'll say this is basically the 4-page summary of what we talked about. And the purpose of this is partly to inform you guys and inform the community sort of where we're taking this. The other reason this is really important is because eventually, as we pull some of this information together, we have to get the regulators involved. This eventually does affect our permits, it does affect compliance schedules that we have. And so this is really helpful in the first meeting to show them that here's our plan, this is where we're going with this. And this is the plan that we're on. So that was the purpose of this document. So it is, we do have file on there. If you guys read it and you have anything else you want to add or take out or change, please let us know. Now's the time to get that in before we go.
Yep, no, that's great. Element 2, and that's actually kind of where we are right now through this process, is evaluate existing systems performance. And so your community, and Jeff was very proactive with doing this because you already do have the water treatment master plan, the wastewater master plan that's in development now. We were expecting to see that a couple months ago, but you know, we just received it last week, the first draft of it. So we're taking a look at what's incorporated in that. You know, your current collection system, your distribution system, and again, stormwater. And so you're really evaluating the existing system's performance and really just kind of going through and determining what we're gonna have to do. And at this time too, we're kind of taking, or we're looking ahead and we're wanting to incorporate all of the Safe Drinking Water Act issues, the Clean Water Act issues. And so we're just really evaluating what you currently have and what we need to get to moving forward.
Lacey,
Yes.
just one thing to point out, we all will see where it says Columbia on the front of this. That's HDR's office location.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm gonna take that
So
off
it's
the
not-
file, so it's
Not
not
Columbia,
confusing.
not Columbia Vision Plan.
It's our terrible format.
Got
We're stuck with it, we're stuck with it.
Element 3 that's expected to be seen in the integrated plan is engaging the community and stakeholders. And that's something that we want to talk to you about, you know, how we want to go through this, what the timeline is going to be. We've got a couple of slides on that later on in the presentation, and we can really have a discussion on what your expectations are, you know, and how we should go through that process. And we'll get feedback from you on what you guys would like to do with that. Do you want to talk about-
Yeah, sure, and I just, on this whole community outreach and engagement thing, I'll show you a couple of examples out here in Columbia, their plan, and then on Rolla. And one thing I'll point out, so the 6-step process that EPA has put together is really supposed to be sort of a long-term continuous process that you go through. So the idea here is not like, we're gonna put the plan together and that's the plan for, this is the plan we're gonna put together, it's kind of a living document. Usually the way we set it up, and we found it's effective to set it up, is to sort of lay out, okay, here's our initial 25-year schedule. Here's all the stuff we think we need to do. And then we break that up into 5-year chunks. Okay, it says here's what we think's gonna happen in 25 years. Here's what we know is gonna happen in 5 years. So we're gonna do that. And then in 5 years, we're gonna come back with a 5-year plan. And so those 6 steps that you see on that graphic, we're sort of continuously going through that process for 5 years. So when it comes to outreach, just know that this is not like a one-time deal. This is gonna be outreach throughout. There's gonna be outreach when we do some bonding discussions and all that. So this is not the only time. But this is really today, kind of the start of talking to you and engaging you in this process. So with that introduction, Columbia, their plan is very wide ranging, is a really big plan. And with their plan, they had a little bit of flexibility in some of their projects.
Come on, you're good, you're good. Yeah, it's on.
They had flexibility in some of their projects, being able to sort of go out and ask the community, hey, would you rather do project A or project B, which one's more important? And prioritize and adjust their schedules using that process. And to do that, we had a lot of different community meetings, workshops, where we invited people, we had surveys, we had meetings with the council, we had individual meetings with the council, sort of to get to that prioritized project schedule and that ultimate project integrated plan. Rolla was a little bit different. Rolla, like I mentioned, they had 3 big treatment plants and they had projects they had to do. There was really no question, like, I mean, we'd love to go out and ask the community, what do you think? And we did, but we didn't have to do these projects. So it was really more about building support for it, making people understand why we need to do these projects, why we need those rates, and knowing that we're spending the money wisely. So there, the outreach process was a little bit different. There, we primarily focused on working through the council, again, because we guys represent the public, so getting public feedback to the council. We did have one open house specifically focused on the plan, and then one we reached out to. And basically did that to sort of build a streamlined plan that laid out the capital plan. So those are kind of like 2 extremes on how we can do this. And I know, I'm sure you guys want to be involved, you're curious, and why we're talking about spending all this money. And so, you know, as we go through this process, if you've got ideas on what you want to see when it comes to outreach, we're more than happy to hear them and try and incorporate them as best we can. We got a project schedule at the end. We'll show you that we do have some deadlines just because of the grant that's funding this project has got some deadlines that will kind of have to be finished, but between now and then, we want to do whatever you guys think is right. Knowing that we can always come back around the second phase, do more, do differently, whatever you guys think.
Yeah, the one thing that they briefly hit on it is that because of regulatory compliance, there will be certain components of this that we have to do. We don't have a choice. So those will more than likely come in the first part of this plan and over this 2025 30-year plan, whatever it is that we end up with. And so we'll jump on them first, but as we work through the process, like you said, every 5 years or so, we'll go back in and review the process, because that's what we owe Missouri DNR when we do this. We owe them an explanation of when we're gonna go in and do these review periods. And then that way they're aware of that. That holds us accountable as a city that we're doing what we said was gonna do 20 years prior. So just,
So what's the action that locks the city and future councils in to following the meeting of deadlines for those different components that have to be achieved? Like the funding agencies are going to
Yeah.
require.
No, that's a great question. So, and we'll hit a little bit more in a few slides, but because this is a Clean Water Act focused process, right? It really gets reflected in your discharge permits for your wastewater treatment plant and your stormwater system. And so within, and we got an example, if you won't be able to read it, we can send it to you after. Within the permit, it'll say the city has developed an integrated plan. The department will usually, when you finish the plan, they'll usually send you a letter that says, hey, we acknowledge you've got this plan, we agree with what you've got laid out, go ahead and do it. And so they'll, in the permit, they'll say, hey, we acknowledged it. And then it would typically have sort of this 5-year process written up in there. And then we've also added like an annual reporting requirement in there. We've actually added that for the city benefit, because it does help keep on track and make sure that you're doing what you said you're going to do. So every year you get a report to DNR, yes, we did the projects we said we were, no, we didn't. If you don't, there's still some flexibility in there for you guys to change it up. So it's not like you're going to get any kind of enforcement action if you don't do the projects. If you have a good reason for it. If you just blow it off and don't do it, well, then we're not holding up our end of the bargain. We expect them to come in. But if there's a good reason to shift projects around, maybe things get cheaper, maybe we need to push them back out, whatever, that allows us the flexibility.
So are those grouping of projects and efforts, are those approved via ordinances that the city would adopt? And that way lock the future council members into following those?
or see, let me bounce it off you and make sure I'm right. So, Johnny, yes, it'll be a Missouri DNR compliance letter that we're accepting as a city, that we have to stay in compliance with that.
Okay.
Okay?
But I can just see new council people coming on and they've told them we're going to keep rates down and we're not going to do anything else because we're going to be the lowest so we can have more people come to town, right? And then that shoots us in the foot clean out of the south at some point, and we get a black eye and the feds come down on us with penalties and that kind of thing. We don't want to see that happen.
No.
Right.
And that's definitely where this is kind of like a two-way street. So they're giving us the flexibility to set our schedule, and then we've got to sort of stick to the schedule. And in Columbia, I think we're all too, I can't remember off the top of my head, but in Columbia, we had a council motion to basically adopt the plan
You did.
and move it forward to DNR. So that was like before we actually submitted it, got the letter to DNR, and council said, yeah, we're gonna do this. So,
What kind of action or what kind of participation did the local appointed planning commissions have during these exercises?
So in Columbia, I'm trying to remember if that's. In Columbia, we had like, I want to say we had like 160 or 70 different community members at one of our 4 different meetings that we had. And they represented all the different interests. So I believe we had some people from the planning commission there to help give some input on priorities. Raleigh was again a little bit different. It was kind of working through the council. We sort of had a shorter, more definitive list of projects. So, but there's involvement there. There's opportunities to involve whoever from the community would be helpful here and obviously in the large.
John, too, the other thing too is to state on that there, well, is that the way the plan is starting to kind of shape up in its early stages, take it for that, is that it's leaning more towards the RALA, where it's regulatory guided that we have to do this. Okay.
I understand that.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
a-
It's
no way
not
out
a,
of that one.
yeah, it's not the other side where Columbia's was, that they had a lot of pieces that provided public input, you know, that where they moved up things into their schedule faster because of the public input piece. It's the other end of it where it's the regulatory compliance part of it, where we're kind of, you know, being dictated that, hey, you gotta get this done. Because you're not meeting this criteria for whatever case it may be. But like I said, it's still early in the process.
Sure.
And there's other phases of this that go along in time that we may be able to push off later and then maybe move a water project up prior to a wastewater project.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things that we'll understand that better in a few more months down the road.
Good question. More on the outreach piece, I'll talk through right now.
We're gonna talk about it. So, element 4, evaluate alternative solutions. I didn't make this slide. I don't know who made this slide, but they were really in the cars apparently. But, so basically, you know, and that's, you know, kind of all being done in your master plans anyway. So we're capturing this within the master plan, but, you know, we'll develop a write-up. We'll incorporate some of the community outreach and community engagement components and really talk about what those alternative solutions are. So I think David said to you, all of these elements, you know, it is a framework developed by EPA. So EPA does expect each integrated plan to hit on all of these elements. They don't always kind of flow with each city's unique needs and everything like that, but we still do have to, you know, kind of fit into the mold of what the framework is. Yeah. Element 5 is to develop the solutions and the schedule. And as we go through that, you know, those will just kind of fall out, you know, what the solutions are, what the best schedule is, you know, especially after we've engaged with community and then DNR as well. And then we look at the rate schedule moving forward and really adjust the rates over the long term to what, you know, what the capital investment should be over the long term to keep your rates low. And then element 6 is the implement and measure success, and really it's more of the iterative process. So as you go through this, obviously over time, what we decide today and what you guys do adopt within the integrated plan could change over the next 5 years. And so in both EPA and DNR expect that there are going to be certain changes to communities that would need to change the integrated plan. And so you really just evaluate it either on it's in regulation that you reevaluate every 5 years. The annual report thing is kind of, you know, we can write that into your permit, or we could do, you know, every other year, you know, we just have to decide, but they understand that you may have to change that integrated plan. You might have to prioritize, you know, an investment ahead of what you thought you were going to do, you know, over the next 10 years. So it's really just evaluating. Also, you know, I think that you guys are going to implement an asset management program. So, you know, we can put that into this as well. And, you know, the asset management program could identify needs that we didn't know that you had. And so while we're going through this process, and so, you know, after 5 years of implementing the asset management program, you might decide that you need to spend money elsewhere. And so that's another thing that could change the integrated plan over time. So it's meant to be iterative. It's not meant to last forever, but it is supposed to kind of guide you over the long term. Really, I think what EPA said, it was really meant for communities to be able to kind of step back, evaluate what they have currently, take a look at future regulatory drivers, and develop a long-term strategic plan that was going to work for each individual community, instead of what they were seeing, which was every community was just kind of slapping band-aids on things, spending money unnecessarily, and nothing, no environmental improvements were actually happening. You know, communities felt trapped. They felt, you know, they were struggling with rate raises. And so this is just supposed to guide you and allow you to do a long-term strategic plan. And it's a way to do that under the Clean Water Act. This is what David was saying. This is the integrated plan incorporation into the MPDES permit. So each wastewater treatment facility has an NTDS permit, it's a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. Didn't know what that acronym meant. But this is your federal permit that's issued by the state of Missouri that, sets your effluent limits and everything like that for your wastewater treatment facility. Because over the last 10 years, your wastewater treatment capital investments have really driven what is and what is not affordable for communities. This is where they felt that the integrated plan would fit best. So they put your, integrated plan into a special condition within your permit, saying that you do have this plan. It will be reevaluated every 5 years. Every 5 years works because each wastewater permit is renewed every 5 years. So DNR will be looking at the renewal of your wastewater treatment facility, see that you have an integrated plan, ask to see, what progress that you've made on the integrated plan. So having that annual report would be helpful because it kind of keeps you in check of what you've done every year. But if you didn't want it to be an annual report, we could make it a little bit more flexible. I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. in how we incorporate it.
Yeah.
But we found that it is important to get, that's really the only regulatory sort of book that us and DNR have to make sure that we're all good enough to do it. We agree with. It's one thing to submit the plan and get a letter from them and say this is great. It's another thing to have it in permanent. It's okay, we agree with it. So it's simple, so. And then,
Yeah, are there any questions on?
it's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot. So
This is just that.
David and I talk about this all day, every day, so
We
we
don't live very exciting lives, unfortunately.
talk about wastewater a lot.
And then with that, we talked about this a lot, but we've written a lot with these 5-year sort of updates. That will, we develop a 5-year plan, it works out really nicely. And the 5-year update would also have what we call a 5-year action plan. So that lays out, hey, here's the thing we're gonna do in the next 5 years. And again, this is not, one question we get a lot is this about doing projects or is this about spending money? So like, what happens if we get into this and we find a project that, hey, it didn't cost us however many $1 million to upgrade a treatment plant, is that okay? And yes, that's okay. If you like these the right way, it's a project-based sort of approach. It's not you're not gonna get it nailed because you send it to. So that's always an important distinction that comes up later, and that's that slide together, that's a lot. That's the idea of that one, is that sometimes we get into these projects and, technology is moving so fast, you find something that all of a sudden was a lot cheaper than it was a few years ago.
Also, with what's to do the 5-year, when the EPA makes changes, we can incorporate.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. And part of David and I's job is to forecast what those regulatory drivers are going to be, over the next 10, 15 years. I mean, we are very engaged with Region 7 and DNR. I mean, I worked with DNR for 5 years. I have great relationships with the Water Protection Program Director, the DNR Director. And so it's very helpful when we're going through these things. And it's like, okay, so when do you think that you're going to put nutrient requirements into regulation? And I mean, they're just very straightforward with me. Okay, we're going to do this over the next 5 years, this over the next 10 years, this over the next 15 years. That's the plan. And so we use that information to look at this, again, holistically and say, okay, maybe you could push off, that second round of upgrades, which would incorporate, nutrient removal another 5 years, because we know that you're not going to need it right now. And so that's just an example. But so that's things that we are looking at as we move forward. Things that we're really focused on right now is, lead and copper, the lead and copper rule, and what this new Biden administration is really going to focus on. So wet weather issues, that's something that we know is going to be a focus. So that's something that we really want to address on the front end of these capital improvements, rather than something that we know can be pushed off.
I told you we need exciting letters. We could talk for 3 hours about regulations. I'm sure you guys will be bored to tears. But it is all really, really important.
You wouldn't have much of a crowd by then.
No,
I was gonna
know.
say, it's not gonna take 3 hours.
We had one slide back there that I went through in about 10 seconds that you didn't know had 2 hours behind it, so. So that's kind of the just basic process, okay? And so when we start looking at what this looks like for West Plains, I mean, I think you guys got a feel for it. You guys got a lot of master plans sort of coming together, so we've got a lot of the information that's kind of there. We just need to repackage it in a way that makes sense and just thinking about this in a prioritized way. Big picture, we're targeting into January for a draft plan being pulled together. Part of that is being driven by, and I'm gonna probably speak out of turn there, but the grant that is funding this, I think expires in January. And initially, I think we were thinking that some bonding activities might have to happen a little bit earlier than they look like they are now. So we don't have a ton of flexibility in that end date. And so, going back to that discussion about what that community outreach needs to look like. I mean, we can obviously do whatever makes the most sense for you guys, as well as but whatever we can fit kind of in that time between now and January that makes sense, it gives you guys what you need, I think is really the way to move forward on that. But ultimately, the plan, we're gonna have this long-term investment schedule, we're gonna try and get it as affordable as possible over time, kind of mitigate some of those rate impacts. What I think is really an important goal down here is that I think this plan is going to show that in the first 5 years, we're going to kind of, Jeff and his crew are doing a lot of good things. They're going to keep doing some of the projects they're doing. There's probably some pretty important planning studies that still need to happen. Trying to understand the drinking water flows at the treatment plant so that we can be certain that some of those future upgrades are really needed. And so the plan will probably have some of those initial studies built in those first 5 years. Some of the asset management work that you guys are all working on that could inform some of those future projects will be included there. And then out beyond those 5 years, I'm guessing is where some of those big projects and stuff are. And so the project won't hit to 6-7 years from now, but we got to start thinking about what rate increases look like between now and then, so we have money available to actually fund the project. Big picture, that's kind of like what we're seeing this thing come together as. And like Nancy and Jeff said, we're still working through some alternatives. Anyone else to add on that?
Oh, there's probably a whole lot to add.
There's a whole lot to add.
I want to go on to the next thing. No, let's wait for a minute.
All right, this is the last slide. So schedule wise, and I hope you guys can see that all right. So this is just sort of outlines the high level tasks kind of that fit those different steps that we just walked through. The gray,
You'll come back.
the gray was sort of our initial schedule when we're planning for certain things to happen. One of the important things is this forward, and not to keep hanging on the outreach, but we're really hoping to start up the outreach after we have all of the information on the water system and the water system.
But that was based on bonding in April.
Yes.
We're not doing that now. The focus was more on getting the public input piece because we were going to reach out to bonding at such an early date. That is not going to happen now. So we're not saying that we're not going out for outreach. It's just the timing sequence is going to be different. Where it's going to be on the back end of this after this January date. More focused then than it will be during this time.
That's right. And so a lot of these shifts that you're seeing a couple months back right now are just based on sort of that. And, aside from any outreach, based on engagement with DNR, letting them know, showing them this document, letting them know we're going with this. And so, as soon as this wastewater plan wraps up, we're expecting pretty soon, that's when we have to start up. Really letting them know. So this is right now what we're looking at, still trying to target that January deadline, and we're just, we're gonna work our hardest to make that happen.
And we're looking at starting with, you gotta do this first, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly
So,
right.
community outreach at that point, we gotta do this no matter what.
Right.
It's more of an education.
It's more of an education piece.
Yeah.
Right, and with that.
Yeah.
One thing on this graphic, kind of following along here, you put it in arrows. This shifted over to here.
Sorry.
So when you see that red arrow, that corresponding gray block shifts over to that next one. And a lot of that, the reason that happened was because the wastewater treatment plant study, we were supposed to get a draft in March, it was March, draft in March, and then with a final in April or May, late April or May, early May. We did not get the draft till last week. So that's part of the reason why that has happened. The other thing is that, internally, there's been a decision not to go for bonding next year. So there's not as much of a, hard deadline now. We can shift things a little bit to the right and still be fine with everything.
What caused the delay in having that initial study plan?
The draft, having the draft from the wastewater treatment plant, because they were still finishing up their data collection part of the piece, data collection piece of that. It took longer than what they expected.
So what's been pushed out? No bonding efforts in April. What's pushed that out?
Because of the comprehensive,
Capital
capital
improvement
improvement
plan that
tax,
we don't have.
capital improvement tax.
Yeah, okay.
Instead of having it prior was in 23.
Yeah.
it's in 22.
Try that.
Try, let's see if I. Show the.
Yeah, I wanna show that.
Yeah, let's show this. There's another side that we want to show you that kind of works in this timeline. It'll kind of start making things look a little bit more sync. when
Drag
you
it from
start
one screen to
looking
the
at
other.
this.
What's that?
Just drag it from one screen to the other. I don't know which direction it is.
There, it's on.
Josh, you still okay? Can you hear everything?
I'm good.
Okay.
Good deal. Very good.
Hey, John, straight up.
There you go.
Cool.
That's a slide.
Oh, that's-
Here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing this. Do you want to talk about it or? you figure out how to-
Yeah, you're gonna have to go.
You wanna go up
So,
here? You see her? Small?
Okay.
It's fine, just slide her around a little.
We're testing that. Abilities here. Okay, what's that?
okay.
I'm gonna say- It's a. Oh, that's-
Oh, yeah. That way you can do that.
That looks like a fancy.
Go ahead.
Okay, so so we're thinking that you do have to go to bond, right, to get public funding. So but, right now, Missouri DNR offers the state revolving fund financing,
SRF.
SRF, yep. And right now, typically their interest rates are the lowest that you can find anywhere else. It's a combination of state and federal funding. There are, of course, additional hoops to jump through, but, interest rates right now for SRF are about 0.9%, which is, if you go to private side, it's 3.9 or 2.9 right now. So you're saving really like about, we calculated $300,000 a year if you go through SRF financing. So on a $40 million project, right? So we're kind of looking at a timeline, and if you wanted to go ahead and move forward with starting to go through SRF funding to get money for your wastewater treatment facility, you would have to go out for a RFQ for your preliminary engineering design. Just the second half of 2022, and then we would really focus in on the education and outreach all through 2023 and the first part of 2024.
These are cool.
Yeah, the reporters, and your bond election would be in April of 2024.
which would be the beginning of the second quarter.
Yeah, the beginning of the second quarter.
So if you
Yep.
look at lots correspondence of your quarters here.
Right. So the two things that you need to have when you apply for SRF funding is you have to have your bonding in place and you have to have your preliminary engineering design complete. And so then we would be able to apply for SRF funding by March 1st of 2025, which in order to qualify for grant funding, you have to meet that March 1st deadline. DNR is offering up to $3 million in grant funding for wastewater projects, so we really want to hit that deadline kind of well. And then moving forward, you kind of, these are all the hoops that you do have to jump through for SRF funding, but $3 million and low interest rates, you might as well do it.
Go back just to 26, David. To the beginning of 26. There you go.
So you would have already gone through the environmental, cultural review, engineering, design, your construction permit, you do your financial capability review. Actually, a lot of your financial capability will be completed with this integrated plan. So you'll just be able to pull stuff from the integrated plan and stick that into financial capability statements. So that'll be helpful. And then you close on your loan. When is that? End of 2026, and construction begins in 2027. And you would have to, your loan repayments begin in the second half of 2028. And we were thinking, we calculated that loan repayments on $40 million. Yeah.
Well, roughly per year, if you
Yeah.
go off the interest rate on SRF funding right now, the way it is right now, you're looking somewhere in the ballpark of $2.5 million a year that you're paying out.
This is $40 million. This is just a rough estimate. Don't get too hung up on $40 million.
Yeah.
That covers what kind of improvements does this cover?
So this is for any type of wastewater.
Collection or just treatment?
Well, so that we still have to this, we still. have to
It
figure
could
that out,
cover,
like,
it could cover.
Yeah, it could cover
It
both.
could cover both.
Yeah.
But the but to this is that if it does cover both, then your dollar amount's gonna go up.
And there's a similar process on the drinking water side. There's a drinking water SRF that it's a little bit simpler than this, and a little bit quicker maybe, but same type of approach. And the takeaway, the biggest takeaway, at least in my mind here, is that, you do something like this to finance it, and the loan will really start till 2028.
So you have time to raise rates and really build that, build that.
Yeah.
company.
Basically, you got a 4-year ramp.
Yeah.
To get going here.
And so these are all like, the ideas that we're trying to work through with the plan together, trying to keep that rate increase. So
If you look at it right now, the other ramp that you have to play with is starting next year. You start that ramp a year earlier. You could have a 5-year ramp.
And what's the payback on those bonds?
That's what we're saying, is that roughly on 40 million with the 0.9% interest is $2.5 million a year, roughly.
How many years out?
That
20.
is 20
That's
years.
20.
Now, that's what
Yeah, it's 20 years
and
old.
what's the repo on it?
Yeah. Just saying. It'll be.
Yeah, that's your-
That's what it is.
Yeah, but that's not close for time.
Well, it's past retirement. Well, I don't know about 28. It depends.
The reason I asked, I know you got the SRF included in there. If there's sections of town that are low income, I'm thinking Black Grant,
Yes,
or we can separate those areas out that meet that 51% of moderate income. Those areas could be eligible for additional grant to help keep the overall loan costs down. Are you gonna look at that, maybe sector the city out in different areas?
So for CDBG funding, yeah, and that's something that we can definitely take into consideration, when we're going through some of the financial capability review for the integrated plan. That's something that's typically done when you go through the RFQ and hire an engineer to go through that. That's something that they typically look at then. But we can certainly include in the integrated plan that, you know, going through this process, you do want to take a look at CDBG, you do want to take a look at SRF funding, any other federal or state grants that are available, take into consideration as you're going through these upgrade
And
processes.
that's where that whole idea about, are we doing projects or are we spending a certain amount of money? When you start doing these projects, you're gonna find opportunities like that. You want to know and do them cheaper, and so you don't want to be penalized for that. In the old ways of doing things, old EPA, you want to penalize for that. An agreement to spend $100 million, not to do 10 million.
Right.
So that's why those things, as you go through it, it's gonna be definitely.
So, and it's great right now too, Missouri DNR and economic development do work really well together right now to make sure that CDBG grants do combine.
They talk to each
Yeah,
other.
they're doing a great job of that right now. Ag, you know, they've got financing available as well. I have found that it's not as user friendly.
They've got a huge checklist.
They do, yeah. And unless you're gonna go like a land application route or something like that, if you're gonna put, you know, a vertical infrastructure in place, it's just better to go with DNR.
Sorry.
That's 25 hours.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Get on the list.
Yeah,
So,
that was the last slide.
that was the
Yeah,
last slide, but we can talk about whatever.
Yeah.
So, start a 2-hour regulatory discussion.
yeah. I will say, you know, like after hearing everything in January and then probably not hearing back from us, I would assume that there was probably some questions, like, wait a second, we're supposed to have this integrated plan, you know, where is it? So, you know, we definitely wanted to touch base with you, make sure that you had all your questions answered about what an integrated plan is, what it is going to be used for in your community, and how we intend to move forward. So we hope we address that today. If there's any other questions that you have, now's the time.
I have one thing else to tell you all before we all start in on the question part of it. On this timeline here, there's an RFQ and an engineering report that happens. That is not to be confused with the studies that you have had currently completed. That's actual design of components in the wastewater treatment plant, whatever the case that may be. So I just want to clarify that what you paid for in the past is for studies. You have not done anything to the. I can say something, sorry.
Trains like the station. You were talking about all the hoops where you're gonna have to jump through. That's part of what you guys, services you provide is holding the hoops for us, or?
You know, with the integrated plan, that is a different set of hoops than taking you through the SRF process. This process will be addressed again when you go through that RFQ and you hire an engineer for the design. It'll be that company that.
We'll say HDR is an engineering company, they can help you through that process when they do the design.
Marketing.
If we're so lucky to choose, but yeah.
But-
Man, we'll switch and make.
I have to say it, they're watching.
But that is where,
Okay.
you know, you would have assistance there, but.
There's a message from Josh Youngblood. MPUA can help facilitate that process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Josh.
That's
We go in for
important
you,
too.
man.
Yeah.
Glad we're a member.
Yeah.
Yeah, in many ways.
And, yeah, and $90,000+ a waste right now.
For sure. For sure.
Okay,
That sound good? Sound like everybody's understandable? And again, and the whole outreach and community engagement, if you've got ideas, please let us know. Otherwise, I think we had planned sort of 2 meetings that were to be determined, just to see how the plan is coming together. So, you know, doing it through council is the most effective approach.
when are we looking at having a list of what we gotta do? Where we can start having those discussions?
Well, Lacey, you can comment on this too. The draft signified the wastewater treatment plant study draft signified what they're looking at. They're going to confirm that up and give us a final version of that study. That'll tell us the definite, hey, this is what we got to do, type things. Then we already know what we've got to do on the water side, really. So it's a matter of staging those pieces in, how they stagger into play there. Water storage capacity is probably the number one thing it's not probably, it is the number one thing that we work on.
That's what I kind of
Because
figured.
we've got to be able to fill the towers enough to where our plant can produce, right? Okay, so you got the water towers, then you got regulatory compliance, that you have at the wastewater treatment plant. If you look at this timeline right here, we started doing a very kind of overall heightened overview of that today. Looking at it, that's a little different thing, it takes too long to get to. But here's kind of the generic plan, if you all will. Water storage capacity next year, maybe looking at a loan for maybe doing phase one of that next year, okay? Then that sets up the timeline to do bonding for wastewater for the next year, which would be in 2024, right? In April, that's what this timeline is that we got here. Then you start your SRF process the next year, which is in 25. Takes you 3 years to end the construction there. Then that gets you from 21 to 28. I think that somewhere in around 27 is whenever you're probably going to be building phase 2 of the water towers in there. Okay. Then 30 is the goal to shoot for water treatment plant. And then you'll be going out for bonding again at that point in time. That's kind of what it looks like as of today. It may change tomorrow, to be quite honest with you. But that's kind of what it looks like right now. We'll have a better timeline lined up with you because of the integrated plan. We'll draw that out sometime later on in November.
Also, I was hoping to maybe have our first community meeting, I would say October,
Okay.
hopefully. It just depends on when we get the final report, and then we can really sit down and, just list out all of the needs. And then, we kind of went through today on some of the needs that we believe are going to be finalized with those reports, and kind of started drafting them out. But we really want to be able to come to you all, and then also we want to invite some of the stakeholders within the community, and regional planning commissions, or business owners, if we want to invite them as well. We want to have an accurate depiction of what the community needs before we just kind of start talking about stuff. So,
And I would also say, I think we were targeting like maybe early September to have our first discussion with DNR. So between all of us, going into that meeting, we're gonna have a pretty solid. We might not give it all to them then, but that would be an opportunity to maybe in a work session like this, whatever, you guys want to see how we're shaping up and what we were taking to DNR, we can do that. We can make that call. But that's another opportunity early on.
However you all want to do
Early
that.
on to do that. So much including you guys don't have.
yeah. I'd love to, if we can fit it in, have at least 2 community engagement pieces before this plan is finalized, in addition to meeting with DNR 1 or 2 times.
Yeah, and again, if that's super council discussion.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. If that's it, if you guys have more questions, we're more than happy to stick around. And we're always available.
So what we're laying out here is primarily for the wastewater side.
This is,
Yeah.
This one.
the SRF financing, yeah. Drinking water financing, SRF financing is a little bit different timeline, but it takes generally just as long.
And one thing we didn't talk much about is stormwater. So stormwater will also be included just because it is one of the Clean Water Act programs. there's a lot less to deal with on stormwater. Including it really just gives you guys more regulatory coverage than anything with DNR, so we can talk, get into those details more. Some other time.
Is this what you expected on your first day?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking forward to.
Good.
And you use Excel, which is, that's top notch. So,
you use it well, but we. Good deal. Okay. Okay.
No, I'm good.
Do
I'm
you
good.
guys have a better understanding of integrated plans?
Yeah.
It's to-
That was the whole intention in this
Okay.
meeting, was make sure we come out of this with a good understanding.
Perfect.
And I think so, the kind of next steps, you've met Joy Howard, many of you have, she's our financial advisor. I'm gonna have some conversations with her, I'm gonna make some introductions, for Joy and Earlene. But at some point, we'll come to the council with sort of a government financing options, one-on-one for the council members who are new and the ones that will serve for a little bit longer. It's a good training opportunity, I think, just to refresh everybody's mind on what financing opportunities are available. So we'll be working to get that scheduled, probably either incorporated into a council meeting or maybe a quick work session before. Too long, but we're gonna let Earlene meet Joy first and then get that connection and then we'll.
That'd be great to know when that is.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's one thing, we're not financial advisors. We can just tell you what the schedule is.
So with y'all doing this integrated plan, that doesn't disqualify you from putting in a proposal or design?
No. We'd be happy.
Well, sure.
But, no, it would be, kind of, we'll address that when it comes, but.
Right now, our goal is to keep you guys in the works and that keeps things as affordable. A lot of money to be spent on this.
As long as we understand needs and the urgency to what level there is, we can share that with taxpayers and the water sewer producers. They have to trust us before they'll vote yes.
Yeah, no, I.
Absolutely.
Can't try to find this guy.
Well, and I know I keep saying we're over, but like, and I don't have to say, but that was some of the best feedback we got in Rolla and Columbia was from the council and just sort of being appreciative for that reason. But this plan helps us tell people why we spend this money. And we don't get a lot of questions from people. We get, take the job, but somebody actually laid this out. That's what we're shooting for.
One of my favorite parts about integrated planning too. So I actually worked on integrated plans when I worked for the Department of Natural Resources. I reviewed Springfield and Columbia as it was going through. And as a regulator, you appreciated that the community was really putting the time into developing a schedule that worked for them and putting the time into understanding what the regulatory drivers are going to be and then planning for that and planning in a way that kept those rates affordable for your residents is extremely important, because that then allows you to actually make those investments. Because if you were to raise your rates to 115 people, the amount of people that would actually pay that bill goes down, right? And then so you're actually not getting the revenue to your, facility to where you can't actually make those investments that you have planned for.
That's critical mass.
Yeah.
We got it, and we have water.
And that's what we were seeing at DNR, is, they had these shorter schedules of compliance to meet the ammonia requirements, but nobody was doing it because you didn't get the money. And even after they're raising their rates, they couldn't get the money in to make those investments. So knowing that, communities are able to set the schedule and that's appropriate for them it's a much better way to do things. So it's good to have that support from EPA, DNR, and then, the local government as well to move forward.
came here at the right time again.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate the opportunity to work on this.
I was gonna say. She has the recipe on cooking the books, doesn't she?
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you.
And you all. Bye.
What's your grade?